Hi everybody, welcome to our Bible study on Wednesday, where we're looking at how Saul became Paul and how important his writings and his works are for us today. Last week we closed by a summary of the fourfold aspects of the gospel of Christ according to Paul. These are the crucified Jesus, the resurrected, the risen Jesus, King Jesus, and then Jesus and his lordship, the fourfold gospel of Jesus Christ. So today I want us to look in particular at the first, the crucified Christ, the crucified Jesus. Now, the cross stands at the heart of Paul's theology. He mentions the cross so many times, dozens of times, it seems, on every single page. And when he speaks of the cross, he does so in different ways. How has God fulfilled the promises to Abraham through the cross? How are Jews and Gentiles reconciled through the cross? There are so many different aspects. Now, you might own a crucifix, so in other words, a cross with the image of the crucified king on it. Or you might have a plain cross symbolising the resurrected Jesus. Jesus is no longer on the cross. But the people who wear crucifixes as an item of jewellery do so pointing perhaps to a real kind of heart for that theology of Paul, that notion that Jesus died for them, and we want to picture Jesus doing just that wonderful mighty act for us. But I also think that people wear crucifixes just as an item of jewellery and don't really make the link between the bit of gold and the symbolised execution, the pain and the suffering of Jesus of Nazareth. So if you've got a cross, a crucifix, why don't you look at it? Look at it and imagine other ways of execution. I know this is not very nice homework, is it? But if you think about the guillotine or the hangman's noose or the electric chair, all these awful ways of capital punishment, some still used today, others part of history. Crucifixion was by far the worst way to die, to suffer and to die. And I just wonder whether, the people who might have a crucifix hanging from their mirror in the car, or maybe, a really big crucifix along with lots and lots of other jewellery, whether they make that link between this horrendous way to suffer and die, or whether it's just a bit of gold and a bit of jewellery. So maybe we need to start looking very carefully and understanding the symbols and what they actually mean. Now, every time Paul spoke about the cross, so capital punishment, every time he spoke about it, and in the same breath spoke about salvation and grace and love and mercy, that must have been absolutely shocking, because everybody knew it was the worst way to die. And yet, in the same breath, he talks about love and sacrifice and a way of salvation. That must have been awe-inspiring, offensive, scary, all of those things, all perhaps at the same time. And that is the whole point of it. God has reversed the world's values. He has done the impossible. He's turned shame into glory and glory into shame. And for Paul, the cross is the symbol of liberation. Absolutely. The liberating power, the victory of the one true God, the creator of the world over all the enslaving powers and principalities. And this is why it's at the heart of the gospel. So Isaiah spoke of a herald with a gospel message, and Jesus is that herald. We get a strange picture, I think, sometimes. The strange picture of the servant of God suffering and then being vindicated. And that would have been really strange for the Jewish people at that time. However, it's part of their tradition and part of their narrative. So we need to give priority to Paul's expression of the crucifixion of Jesus. And that describes the crucifixion as this decisive victory over powers and principalities. And the announcement of this crucified Messiah is the key to everything, because it declares to the rulers of this age that their time is up. There is power in the cross of Jesus Christ. So Paul's understanding of the death of Jesus, it wasn't a brand new idea. It wasn't like he was on the Damascus Road and then all of a sudden he had this picture of what would happen and what had happened to Jesus, and that was really important and it was a big shock to him, and this is now what he believed. The power of his gospel comes precisely from the fact that it addresses the pagan world with the full weight of the Jewish tradition. So Paul's understanding now, this kind of epiphany that he has, is a confirmation of what he was hoping to see anyway. Saul the Pharisee would have read the Jewish scriptures not least as a lament for all that had gone wrong, for Israel's failure, for disloyalty, for the sin and rebellion and the consequent national disasters, the whole defeat, the whole exile. In fact, you could read Psalm 74 and just imagine Saul of Tarsus praying in the temple courtyard under the eye of the Romans. So Israel's fate had not been swept aside with this kind of new way of thinking. It had actually reached its climax precisely in the death of Jesus, who was the representative Messiah of Israel. So when Paul declares that the Messiah died for our sins according to the scriptures, this, by the way, is the start of his official summary of the gospel. That's in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8, if you want to look that up. What he means is the entire scriptural story, the great drama of God's dealing with Israel, has come together with the death of a young Jew from Nazareth who was nailed up by the Romans and left to die. So for Paul, the shameful death of Jesus at the hands of the pagans, that is the centre and it's the starting point of what the gospel was all about. It was the fulfilment of Isaiah's message. It was the proclamation of the ultimate royal victory, and it still is the proclamation. It was the Jewish message of good news for the whole world, and that includes me and it includes you. Now, some would have said that hundreds of Jewish people have died in this way through crucifixion. Hundreds and hundreds, young and old. That's what happened in the first century. So why was this execution so special? And I think to use the language of execution, actually, it helps us really pinpoint the absolute horror of what happened. But why was it so special? Paul's answer is twofold. The crucifixion is different because of who it was that was crucified, and because of what happened next. Who it was, and then what happened next. So this is the first of Paul's fourfold understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So today we've looked at the crucified Jesus, absolutely central to the message of Paul. However, it is all encompassing, and Paul speaks so deeply and in so many different ways about how the cross is the answer. So we've got the crucified Jesus. Next week, we're going to look at the risen Jesus and Jesus being king. And then after that, we'll look at God's gospel and Jesus as Lord. So why don't you read that psalm I mentioned, Psalm 74? And why don't you read as well that passage I mentioned from 1 Corinthians? Try and get a feel of just how horrifying that execution was and why it underpins everything that Paul speaks of. So, just a short Bible study today. Have a good week, and I'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.